Today, I'm going to show you how to use your shutter speed for video. If you're new here, I'm Victor Melcher, a DIY filmmaker. I teach what I've learned every Tuesday, and I make a fun video every Saturday. First off, shutter speed refers to the amount of time your camera shutter stays open between each frame. On most mirrorless and DSLR cameras, the shutter speed setting will look like 1 over a certain number. The slower your shutter speed, the brighter and more motion blur your video will have, and the higher the number will be darker and have little to no motion blur. So if your shutter speed's a little too low, you might have too much motion blur. But if your shutter speed's too high, you might have not enough motion blur and your footage is just gonna look jittery and unnatural. So you might be wondering if there's a correct shutter speed you should use for your videos. And luckily, there's a rule for that. The 180-degree shutter rule, which is to keep that bottom number of your shutter speed setting 2 times your frame rate. For example, if you're shooting 24 frames per second, which is kind of the cinematic standard, this is the frame rate that most films are shot at, you'll want to set your shutter speed 1 over 48th of a second. This will give you that proper natural motion blur. And the reason we want motion blur is because that's kind of how our eyes perceive motion. If you took your hand and waved it in front of you, you will notice that your eye picks up some natural motion blur. So essentially with our cameras, we're trying to emulate how our eyes naturally perceive the image. So consciously and subconsciously, when you're following the 180-degree shutter rule, your footage will look natural and smooth, and in turn it will look cinematic. And you can apply the 180-degree shutter rule to whichever frame rate you're shooting. For example, if you're shooting 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second, just make sure that bottom number is 2 times the frame rate. And if you're filming some fast action like sports or cars, where maybe you might take a freeze frame from that video clip, in that case you probably won't want motion blur, so you could even break the 180-degree shutter rule and crank your shutter up to 1 over 500th of a second if you want no motion blur. Now some cinema cameras like the Sony FX3 or the Lumix cameras will have an option to change your shutter speed to shutter angle. And what's cool about this is that now I can just leave my shutter angle at 180 degrees, and no matter what frame rate I switch to from 24 to 60, I don't have to manually adjust my shutter angle because it's always going to be at 180 degrees. If you're filming in bright lighting conditions while following the 180-degree shutter rule, your footage might look way overexposed like this. So in that case, you'll need a variable ND filter. Screw it on like so, and this is basically like sunglasses for your lens that allows you to adjust your exposure until it's proper. And you can rotate the front lens element to make it brighter or darker depending on your situation. Now with lower quality variable ND filters, when adjusting them to their max strength, you might notice a strange color cast and a big X pattern across your footage. So I'd recommend spending a little extra money and investing into a more premium variable ND filter. I've been using the Freewell 2 to 5 stop variable ND filter for like 5 years now, and it has minimal color shift and doesn't cause this giant X pattern. I also occasionally use a Freewell hybrid CPL/VND, which is basically like 2 filters in one, so it'll give you control over your exposure, and the CPL filter will allow you to adjust things like the sky and reflections. And there is a such thing as a solid ND filter, which typically you'll get in sets at various strengths from bright to dark. However, if you're constantly on the go and you're going into different lighting situations, it can be a hassle to have to unscrew that filter and put on the proper strength. So if you're like me and you just like to film fast and have a more convenient option for ND filters, I definitely recommend just getting a variable ND. Now, like any rule when it comes to the arts, you can always break it. Let's say if you want a slow shutter speed to get this blurry shutter drag effect to show that your character is feeling like maybe the world is moving faster than they can even comprehend. One of the best examples of slow shutter is how filmmaker Wong Kar-wai uses it in Chungking Express to create this surreal and dreamlike effect for some of the sequences. Or you can use a fast shutter speed like how George Miller does in Mad Max Fury Road to create this jittery and anxiety-inducing feeling. Or maybe you're just going on a family trip and you're vlogging or something, you don't want to worry about ND filters, so you just set your camera to full auto and let the shutter speed adjust to whatever the lighting conditions are. I actually do this all the time when I'm traveling with my Osmo Pocket 3. I shoot in 30 frames per second and use auto exposure. However, when I'm making a short film or YouTube videos like this where I have time to set my camera up, use an ND filter if I need, and follow the 180-degree shutter rule, I always do. So the most important thing with shutter speed is that you understand how to use it, so that way you can use it to the best of its strength to convey whatever story you're trying to tell. So that's how to use shutter speed for video. If you do have any questions, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. I just want to say a huge thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.